olhares do mundo estão voltados para o Rio de Janeiro. Delegações chegam à cidade para discutir como equacionar desenvolvimento econômico e uma relação sustentável com o meio ambiente. O momento não parece bom. Estamos em meio à maior crise econômica desde 1929. Bilhões de pessoas querem atingir níveis de consumo que apenas 1/7 da população mundial possui. E nos deparamos com a ameaça cada vez mais real de mudança climática. A questão agora: que futuro queremos construir? O planeta entrou na agenda internacional na Conferência sobre Meio Ambiente em Estocolmo em 1972. O secretário-geral Maurice Strong, emblematicamente, já de bicicleta, dizia em seu discurso de abertura: há poucas chances de o homem ter sucesso na sua relação com a natureza, a menos que no caminho ele aprenda a administrar melhor as relações entre homem e homem. 40 anos depois, a pergunta continua atual: como resolver um problema global por meio de lideranças divididas por fronteiras e soberanias? O debate ganhou os contornos atuais na Rio 92, de novo sob a liderança de Maurice Strong, quando sinalizou a necessidade de se criar caminho para uma economia verde, diferente da economia do consumo tocada pelos combustíveis fósseis. A economia verde é de baixo carbono, eficiente no uso de recursos naturais e faz bens para durar. Além disso, é socialmente inclusiva. Mas há vontade política para mudar o cenário? Como incluir os custos ambientais no preço final dos produtos? São muitas as questões que exigem urgência e vontade política. Encontramos Maurice Strong em Pequim, onde hoje é consultor do governo chinês para a economia verde. O homem, que há mais de 40 anos se dedica a transformar a percepção das lideranças globais sobre a importância do meio ambiente, começou sua carreira no setor de petróleo e gás, no Canadá, sua terra natal. Na Rio 92, teve um papel decisivo como secretário-geral, forçando o maior compromisso dos líderes mundiais. Pela primeira vez, formava-se uma estrutura institucional para a proteção do planeta. E o que se espera agora da Rio+20?
Eyes of the world will be on Brazil to determine how it is managing its own problem and how its economic success is affecting its environment and its sustainability prospects.
What is the strongest memory you have from Rio 92?
Well, very positive memories, obviously. It was the largest meeting of heads of government or heads of state that had ever taken place. So it was very exciting. I mean, to have Castro and George Bush in the same meeting was unusual, and it was a historic moment, and the mood was good. The decisions made were really quite impressive. The implementation of those decisions since 1992 has not been so impressive, indeed disappointing. Of course, some have been implemented, but overall, this is disappointing. If governments had done all the things they agreed to do, the problem would be well on the way to solution.
Rio 92 was probably the first time for most people to get familiarized with expressions like global warming, greenhouse effects, climate change, and there was this sense of hope permeating everything.
That's right.
Do you think that the lack of implementation took away this hope?
Well, we cannot abandon hope. But people ask me, are you pessimistic or optimistic? And I have to say, I am analytically pessimistic because of the lack of progress in actually implementing, and things are getting worse, not better. But I am optimistic operationally because as long as it is possible to make the change to a sustainable way of life, we must keep trying to do it. But we have to realize that we're talking about the very future of life on our planet. we have to realize that in the history of the Earth, the time in which it has been feasible to support a human form of life is very short, very small, and within very narrow range. And we are impacting on it. We are changing the conditions that make life possible, and we are putting life itself at risk. And Rio Plus 20 has got to revitalize the awareness of what we are doing to ourselves. See, the planet Earth is not going to go away, but the conditions that support life on Earth, they are under threat, because the natural condition of the Earth is not to support a human form of life. In fact, my belief is that, my hope is that Rio Plus 20 can see the launching of a worldwide people's movement that will require the politicians, who ultimately have to report to their people and ultimately have to do what people want and not just what a few special interests want, that this movement is, in my view, the hope. We have to make the people more aware of what is at risk, what is at stake. The reality is that there is less political will today than there was in 1992. And yet the problem is even greater, more acute, more urgent than it was then. So we're facing a real dilemma, and our biggest hope for Rio Plus 20 must be that it will provide a new launching point for a worldwide movement that will put us on the pathway to real sustainability. The survivors on Earth will not necessarily be humans. They will be other forms of life. I mean, the insects will be the big survivors, because the Earth will not go away, but the life, the support of human beings will go away. And that is the risk, and that risk, people must become aware of it, and their politicians must be accountable to the people for what they actually do with it. Now, Rio Plus 20 cannot do it all, but it can give it a new pathway, a new boost, and launch a citizen movement. I don't believe that we should look at Rio Plus 20 as just a 2 weeks. It has to be a continuing process.
You are a consultant for the Chinese government on going green or doing things in a less aggressive way. China today is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, but China is also the country that invests most in green economy. How do you analyze the path that the Chinese government has chosen?
Well, actually, the Chinese, originally, like most other industrialized countries, gave second place to environment. The economy was important. But now the Chinese are in the lead. The green economy is the policy, and it is not only just words. For example, China has higher emission standards than for its automobiles, etc., than the United States. But the problem is that the economy growing so fast that sometimes it offsets the gains. I am very much involved in it. Building, for instance, buildings, green buildings. China is committed to building 500 new cities of at least 1 million people, green cities, and they're actually doing it. There are incentives for that. So it is, China is moving. And what China does matters. I've been involved with China right from the beginning, right from Stockholm. Stockholm in 1972 was the first world conference that China attended after it took its place in the United Nations. And after that, as a result of Stockholm, they formed their Environment Protection Agency. And I worked with them right from that time. So I've had a long relationship with China. And of course, initially, their Environment Protection Agency was quite weak, like many others. Now it is a ministry. It is very strong, and the commitment of China to the green economy is one of the best in the world. The problem is, it is one of the biggest economies in the world, And it is growing so fast that makes it more difficult to manage the problems, but they are managing well.
Some agencies did the math, and they say that if all Chinese were living in the same standards as Americans, there would be no place on earth for other people but the Chinese. Do you think that they are aware that the consumption patterns for China cannot be the same as the US, or they need to do differently?
There is an awareness of it, yes, but they also are aware that the people who are having the most doing the most damage to the environment are precisely those in America and Canada and other countries, more developed countries. They're the ones that are actually doing more, and they have to be the ones who take the lead to improve the situation. You cannot say that because America refuses to change its way of life, that China cannot move. That would not be fair, will not be realistic. The whole world has got to move onto a pathway of more sustainable development. And the most difficult ones are precisely those that have been had the leading economies. Now, of course, there are new economies. China is not the only one. Brazil has made tremendous economic progress, and Brazil is experiencing both the benefits and, frankly, some of the problems of that economic growth. I mean, in your agriculture, impinging on your very precious rainforest. I mean, there are a lot of things that the world will become more aware of because of Rio Plus 20, because the world will be focusing on, well, what is Brazil is hosting this conference, but what is it actually doing itself? And so the world will be watching, and the world will be realizing that Brazil now is one of the great countries in the world.
Rio Plus 20 is centering the debate on human development,
Yes.
on fighting poverty.
Yeah.
How is that important, and would it distract from the other subject, which is a greener economy and cutting emissions?
These have to go together. Relief of poverty is one of the biggest issues. Now, frankly, Brazil, with all its good things, still has bigger difference between rich and poor than most countries. The rich are very rich. Now, this is true everywhere, but it's also very true in Brazil. There's a big difference between rich and poor. And the developing countries have always been concerned with environment that it would take away resources from their relief of poverty. And the relief of poverty is still one of the biggest single challenges around the world, and even the poverty of industrialized countries. It's the difference between rich and poor in all countries, even in the United States. Now, you see the Wall Street protests and 1%, etc. So there is a growing divide between rich and poor. And you know, I spoke to the United Nations in December, and someone in the audience asked a question, what about the poor? What is that? And I said, do you know any time in history that the rich and privileged have given up their wealth and their privileges to help the poor voluntarily? It only happens through revolution and mass movements. It doesn't happen voluntarily. That was not a very popular thing to say, but it's true. And we saw, even in the United States, we see the Occupy Wall Street movement, which demonstrating the tremendous difference between rich and poor in the United States. And that difference is growing, and it's growing in Brazil, it's growing everywhere. And developing countries have that problem, but industrialized countries are having it more and more as well. So the relief of poverty and is extremely, you're not going to get the poor of the world to cooperate in dealing with the environment unless we give them more financial help and more access to technologies. That will be an issue. It has been an issue even from Stockholm and 1992, the Earth Summit. And again, in Rio Plus 20, the developing countries need to have real assurances that they will be helped in their own environmental problems by new resources, what they call new and additional financial resources, and access to the best technologies. It's in our interest to do that. It's not just a charity. It's in our interest because the developing countries, they're most of the world. And if they do not go on a sustainable pathway, it will not be a sustainable life for any of us. So these should not be looked at as charity handouts. These should be looked at as an investment in our own future.
How important is for the planet at this moment to have a more sustainable population growth?
Yes, well, the population is a major issue, but the real issue is what the populations consume of the Earth's resources. And the Chinese consume much less per capita. They cause less, even greenhouse gases per capita, much less than the more industrialized, traditional industrialized countries. So it is a problem. But the one-child policy in China is the most Chinese, even though they would like to have more children, they understand that it is in China's interest to limit the population. And actually, China has brought more of its people out of poverty than any nation has ever done in history. The Chinese are much better off today than they have ever been. And the Chinese, yes, they want to have even better life, but they're not going to say, well, we will wait because we must let the Americans and the other Western countries have a better. They don't want to change their life, so we can't change ours because they won't change theirs. So we forget that the real change has to come from those who have created the problem in the first place, and that's us.
How important do you think that the size of Earth's population is at this moment?
Well, it's happening, in some countries already. Japan, for example. Japan is facing a decline in population. Many other countries are facing a decline in population. So demographics is not just universal around the world. And the population growth is mostly in the developing countries, in the poor countries, and they're the ones that are not so able to support such increases. So it is an issue, no question about it. The problem really is we haven't learned how to cooperate on these issues. The Earth is still a system of individual countries, each one pursuing its own interest, very often at the expense, not worrying about the cost to the rest of the world. So we have to really cooperate more than we have ever been willing to do. We have to cooperate if our own future is to be secure, and there is very little evidence that that is happening sufficiently. The real challenge to Rio Plus 20 is to give that movement some new momentum.
One of the strongest memories I have from Rio 92 was you in the global village smoking the pipe of peace.
Yes.
Would you choose to do that again? Who would you invite to sit with you around the fire?
Well, it's not so much who I would like to see, because I like indigenous people and I like their traditions. And I invited them to come into the conference in Rio. But what I would like to see is the people from the industrialized world who are the ones that have to change. They are the ones who have to lead the change. They're the ones who should sit by the fire, and they should even get burned if they don't change.
Were you to give one piece of advice for the governments, what would you tell them?
The decisions you take here in Rio will be more important to the future of your people than anything that you are doing at home by yourselves. People need to work together, and yet there is more competition, more conflict over territory, conflict over resources, and we have not yet learned to work together in the way in which we must work together to secure the future of everyone. And the big issue is not that we should do it as an idealistic thing, but we should do it as an absolute necessity for the survival of our civilization.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate your interest.